Our first panel, welcome to those that are joining us for the second panel. This is sort of part two of the families. We're going to be talking about the role of family in society, looking outward, specifically the elderly, intergenerational support, rights and obligations of families, challenges and such. So welcome. So my name is Holly Raj. I'm the Executive Director of St. Margaret Bourgeois Fertility Care. We teach natural family planning, specifically the Creighton model system. And I'd like to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Margaret Smith.
So my background, I actually was also a practitioner and worked at St. Margaret Bourgeois Fertility Care for many years. My background is in nursing. I've been a registered nurse for the last 40 years, with the last 20 years of my work being in palliative care and most recently working as a volunteer parish nurse.
Hello, I'm Mary Marrocco. I'm originally a theologian. I do sessional lecturing at St. Augustine Seminary for the Toronto School of Theology. I'm for some years now a marriage and families therapist, a psychotherapist. I have a practice in downtown Toronto which specializes in being faith-based, so with a special outreach to people of faith, and also for people who might not financially be able to access psychotherapy. So our goal is to accept people, regardless of what they can pay us. And also I co-coordinate a Project Rachel outreach in the Archdiocese of Kingston. And so that's some of my background and the work that I do.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Moira McQueen, a former lawyer. That was so long ago, I don't think it counts anymore. So I'm a moral theologian, bioethicist, retired from Canadian Catholic Bioethics Institute just last August, but still immersed in bioethics. It's very wonderful that I'm able to contribute through the revision of the Catholic Health Ethics Guide, so I do a lot of policy work, policy writing, in conjunction with ethics committees, etc., and of course the bishops. And also in education, I think I'm revising the family life curriculum, which is very important for the topics here today with consultants, etc., ICE, the Institute for Catholic Education, and various ploys like that.
Hello, dear friends. My name is Christian Elia. I'm a professor currently serving as Associate Dean at Ontario Tech University in Oshawa. It's the Fraser Faculty of Education. I proudly teach the Catholic Education course. The course is mandatory for those who are going into Catholic boards. I'm also the director of the Catholic Civil Rights League since 2014. Just to get things spicy over here on the panel, I'm a proponent of the Billings ovulation method. I was actually executive director there for like 2 years, like 20 years ago. That's my Moira McQueen. I used to be a lawyer.
Well, I'm just going to join the club and say that my husband and I are former natural family planning teachers through marriage prep, etc. Only we're Serena.
So, Jesus said, when two or more gathered in my name, a fight breaks out. So that's why we're going to... Okay, I set up my own joke there, see what I did? So I think it's very relevant, though, to being a university professor formerly at Niagara University. I'm so proud to adjunct a little bit at St. Mike's too, teaching in Carr Hall and Alumni Hall was amazing, having gone there. But just working around young people who are actually having families. But what I'm mostly proud, what probably qualifies me the most for this panel right now also is I'm married to Linda, who's a high school teacher, and we have 3 children. Just turned 14, just turned 16, and about to turn 18. And that's it. Looking forward to the next 45 minutes.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I will add a piece, happily married for 20 years in September, and we have two little girls. Some of you may have seen my 9 and 10-year-old wandering around here. And I come at this perspective of asking many questions because, believe it or not, I'm a new parent of only 3 years because we've just adopted our daughters. So I will be asking questions of our esteemed panel to learn more and invite the audience for questions as well. So the first thing I'd like to ask our panel is how they view the role of family in society.
So for my husband and I, we've been married this August 40 years, and we have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. And what I think was very important, I know I was listening a little bit to the previous panel, and I think for us, we always viewed our family as our community. We used to, help serve with some missionary groups, and we had gone down to do missions in Jamaica, and we've been involved in, like I said, the work at MBFC. And we always felt, I always felt I wasn't looking for a community, because I had my community, that was my family. But my family was looking for communities to serve. And so together, all the work that I've done over the years has involved my family. Most recently, through my parish nursing work, my family helped join me in helping to lay a floor for an individual who just needed some work done on his home. And so I think that is important, that as a faith, as a community, we pray together, we go to Mass together, and then we also serve together.
For some reason, this question brings me back to a course I did in Belgium many years ago, which was put on by an Institute for Marital Spirituality, known as INTAMS. And this INTAMS was developed by a Catholic couple. They were a philanthropic couple. And their point in founding that organization was because they found, as a Catholic couple, as a Catholic family, the Church, especially Vatican II, has such a high calling for lay people in the world, and not such a high, not so accustomed to working with lay people, and especially families and couples, on how to live out that high calling, like in the nitty-gritty and the day-to-day of marriage and family life. How do we do that? How do we dialogue? How do we live the faith that the Church has called to us to? And how do we do that not as isolated in units that's responsible for our family, and our family as a whole little domestic church of its own, but how do we do that also in sharing that with the Church as a whole and in dialogue with society? It's a big calling, right? How do we do that? And they put on a course. It was a university course where they brought in professors of different disciplines. It was so interesting, not only theologians, but historians and sociologists, people of different disciplines, to look at what is marriage, what is the family. What really what really came home to me was anyone who's trying to be a couple, trying to be in a family, is trying to do 2 things at once. You're living a social institution, and you're living an ecclesial reality. And there's a tension there, right? That we live not necessarily being able to reflect on it. And all the professors and students that week reflected on it so well. It really helped highlight what to me is the high calling, but sometimes where the difficulty is for us and where we really do need the Church, I think, to listen more, honestly, to listen better and to call out to people. We need to hear you, who you are, and what you are living in your, shall we say, domestic church, so that we can all learn better what that is and how it works. So that's what really struck me, is the tension between those 2 things, how much that's what we're doing.
So I've been married, we have been married, sorry Matt, 57 years. We have 7 adult children and 12 grandchildren. So I think we have our own kind of domestic church. I'd like to think so anyway. As the role of the family in society, I think it's very clear. I hope to my own children that their father and I think that the idea of family is obviously very important, not just because of the number of kids at all, it's got nothing to do with numbers, but just in the way we look at marriage as sacrament. I appreciate what you're saying, Mary, about the dual role, because as lay people in the world, I feel called a lot to speak out publicly and to write that kind of thing and to make a contribution, if you like, to what I think is the betterment of society, and not everybody agrees. Whether or not that actually has filtered down to our children, it's very hard to tell, but I think most parents realise that when they're looking at their role, not just as domestic church, so the very spiritual aspects which are foundational, but encouraging their children to also contribute to society. First of all, to become the best person they can be, as all of us are called just to be who we are. But then, in terms of the common good, etc., in terms really of relationality, that they appreciate what they have to do. And actually, in some of their choices of professions, I think they're illustrating that in many different ways and contributing to society. I think every family, we're talking about the family as the building blocks of society. The security and love and protection for all of us from babyhood on is fundamental to how we develop as people. It's just a harder battle for those who don't experience a sort of solid family life. Most of society gravitates towards marriage and family. There's an instinctual, natural drive towards that. And I think when we come to thinking about the family from a social and political as well as spiritual angle, then the more we can do just to witness perhaps those parts, and to encourage our children and grandchildren, in fact, as they get older, because my eldest is in second year university, at a very pivotal time, everybody knows, in terms of faith, etc. So all of us are at different stages with different groupings, but I think fundamentally that move towards encouraging them to be the best they can be, but also to be relational and contribute to the society that we wish we could have.
So, I'm going to, I thought about this morning during one of the talks, and I consulted our own website, the Catholic Civil Rights League. I clicked on About Us and our mission statement, what have you, which in itself is something that we could build upon. But on one of our points, it said, one of the bulleted points, and I haven't thought about this in a while, maybe for fear of persecution or something like that, but I wrote this down to use it today. We affirm the traditional family to be the only secure basis on which a society can be built. And although that probably was, written 20 years ago, I don't see any need for revision. Let's put it that way. And it's not just something that, an ideal. I think it's actually fact. This morning, I listened to a few statistics about the benefits of marriage and family life and children for Canada as a whole. And even if we weren't talking about building the kingdom of God, which is, as Catholics, is something that's unthinkable, it should be the number one thing on our minds at all times. As Moira was just saying right now, it's not even close. The vast majority of people who instinctively and naturally aspire towards having a family with the purposes of bringing children into the world, raising children, we wouldn't have a society if it wasn't for that. And it's still the vast majority of people who do this. Are there alternative lifestyles? Are there single people? Of course, there are all these things and all these circumstances. There always were. But if we take a look overall as a whole, the numbers are almost negligible, really. And even then, there's participation in family life to a degree. Everybody has the cool uncle, maybe who never married, that the kid's favorite and play a good part, you know, or the widowed grandparent who might be living with the family, or maybe the not so cool uncle that nobody's really sure of, but still a contributing family member to within that. And even the fact that we talk about, you know, different types of families or blended families, right? The word family is still there, it's still in a unit. So these are things that I'm sure are going to be unpacked a lot more in the next half hour. But we also have to, you know, remember that society functions because of us in the mundane things that we do in life as well. The least glamorous of them all, shuttling our kids to hockey practice, you know, or dance, or you know, orthodontist appointments, and all the things that we find doing. By doing those tasks, we're building society, making a stronger country, and also, and we'll talk about this, building up the church as well.
Just when you mentioned hockey practices, so for the last 25 years, Friday night has been hockey night, and from taking my oldest son to now my grandson. So, and all of that matters. You can't miss Friday night hockey. If you want to show up in church Sunday, you go to Friday night hockey, right?
Thank you. I was really struck by Christian's point about the traditional family being the foundation of society. And I think this really nicely leads into our next point, because if we start with the traditional family as that foundational piece, what is the church's view of roles in society? What is the church's view of the family's role in society? I mean, we talked a little bit about that, but let's think we've all decided and agreed that it's a foundational piece, but where does church teaching come into that?
Suggestion.
Don't tell the opposite. I don't mind it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you just repeat that? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not trying to get the difference.
What is the church's view of the role of families in society? And would society, I'll add this part, does society actually agree with the church's view? I think you know the short answer to that.
I'm not sure, except for sure, every Christian, no matter their calling in life, is meant to bring people closer to God, is meant to bring forth the kingdom of God among us and witness to that reality, participate in the sacramental life of the church according to their calling. And the family calling to be family, as you said, and we all agreed, is a special and a high calling. It's not the only calling, right? And it's not an easy one, if I could say. I've been teaching for some years this course mainly to seminarians about psychology and spirituality. And we talk about working with couples and working with families. And they often say at the end of that, well, we have 6 years of preparation for the sacrament of ordination. Where's the preparation for the sacrament of marriage and for family life? So it's supposed to happen organically, and it does happen well in many families, and in many churches I'm sure it does, but also it needs to be tended, right? I'm sure that the church understands the need for us to be tended and attended to and promoted and informed and educated and heard from in our role, in the role of family and as a couple. Let me put it another way, if that's okay. Again, as a marriage and family therapist, I work with individuals, I work with couples. And the first thing I have to say, part of me is that also wounding happens in families. For sure, because the people most easily wounded are children. That's when we're vulnerable, is when we're children, and wounding happens in families. It's the nature of the thing. I studied St. Augustine, And St. Augustine, you can't understand him unless you understand that he grew up in a family where there was domestic violence and there was religious difference in the family, and there are many things. And that wounding was part of his formation too, right? So the healing comes in the family. The wounding comes in the family. The healing comes in the family. It needs to come there. It needs to happen relationally, right? And I think society needs the church, needs the Christian. I don't know if you say Christian family or if you just said family, but a family in general, right? So I think the society needs the family to be well, to mend those things, to be an agent of healing of those things. And I think the church gives the means, I think is when I say for the family to do that. But I wonder how much families feel visible and important in the church. Do they feel, guided? Do they feel like they're agents of this, that they're doing that as, missionaries in the church? How much do they feel like they're held and cared for in that way? Maybe they do. Maybe some do. I don't know. But it's a question I have. How much do we as families feel really upheld and formed in that role? So maybe I'm going through that.
So I used to teach courses also on marriage and human sexuality at St. Mike's Faculty of Theology. So marriage and the family, if you like, from a more academic base, a theologically academic base. And I think that's very important, just as, again, to have that knowledge. The other side of that, of course, and I think that's where the church is ideal, if you like, maybe not ideal, but in terms of what it writes about the family, I think is very important for us to know about. So something like Familiaris Consortio, which King John Paul II issued, I think, in 1986. And it was there that the concept of the domestic church became a little bit more widespread for people. And it was there where he said something like, families, be what you are. And it was just a very positive statement. I think it was a view from the church of just trying to get us maybe saying a sense, that it's a higher calling. Maybe it's not a higher calling, it's also a very natural human calling, but for us it has the sacramental, covenantal aspect, which really, for a lot of us, transforms, if not our behavior and our reactions in the world, but at least what we think about marriage, and makes us appreciate, at least it makes me appreciate, that idea of the importance of the role of the family. So the church it's not because the church says it that is true. The church is saying it because it already is true and is reflecting it, I think, back to us. So I think in many ways how the church sees the family, apart from being the building block, which again is a very human thing. I think Christian said there's no society if there's no family. But they're looking at it, I think, in a deeper way as well, that we're building blocks, and that means we're not just components, but building means constructing something, moving forward, shaping society. The church, I think, I know, cannot do all these things by itself. It gives us the teaching, and it tries to inform us as much as possible. I think it tries to encourage us to move forward and to take on that responsibility again as a baptized Christian, and in marriage as a Christian baptized couple most often anyway, and go forward with that. I mean, that is the mission in Familiaris Consortio. Is build up the family, build up the people in the family. It's not just build up the church because of the numbers, but of course, building up the church is something we could be thinking a bit more strongly about doing. Again, that's nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with action and behavior. I don't know if that's really what the question was. And
it's hard being at the end because it's hard. or I become like the synthesis guy, right? So, which is not really my job either. But, and the metaphor of building, right? And not only building up the church, but building up the country. And if you have, incursions to within the role of the family, the strength of the family, or the perception that the family isn't ideal to strive towards, that building, that construction comes to a halt. So, I really have to say once again, we have to stop looking. Okay, I talk to young people all the time in my job, right, as a professor, and some of them, especially if you taught them a couple times, and if you're their mentor role, or, especially if you have a leadership role at the university, they might ask you some personal advice too. When I get to know them, I'll say things like, so why don't you propose to Sarah? You talk about her all the time, you've been going on for 6 years, you're graduating, why don't you propose? And, I do it so that it won't be a shock to them. I would have been fired a long time ago. It's not inappropriate or anything. And I always hear things all the time, like, well, I want to first move out of the house. I want to save for a down payment, all these certain things. And I'm like, you're 26 already. She's about to say, what are you waiting for? In a way. Do your parents wait necessarily, And so I want them to sort of understand that it's not necessarily one of the many lifestyle choices, but the choice for the vast majority, one that society depends upon. And if they perceive that as thinking that there might be a self-sacrificial element in there as well, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them initially. That's both factual and it's in many ways theologically and catechetically true to a degree.
So reflecting on your question, Holly, what's coming to my mind is the call to family life is a call to a vocation. I think the church views that as marriage is a vocation. And what does that mean? It means, together to grow in love, to grow in knowledge of the Lord, and to share that. And through, like I said, the last 40 years, it's been a spiritual journey. It's been an exchange, a relationship, growing, and we're not all at the same place, and that's okay, because together we're journeying, to that place. That's my palliative care talk, to the end, right? To our heavenly home, and on this earth, as we journey, who are the people that we're going to be the closest with? And that's our spouse and our children. And then from that, being able to extend out, as you said, right? Because it's not just inward, taking that and then and to be able to extend that out. So I think my first thought is, I think the difference is the church views the family as a vocational call, and how we respond to that call. And it's an ongoing, it's ongoing conversion.
That's great. Some really great perspectives here. I appreciate that. And I do want to shift gears a little bit, because I do want to talk within the family about sort of the intergenerational aspect and the different components of the family outside of the nuclear family, mom, dad, and kids situation. And talking about the family looking outward, how is it that the church and society may be able to promote intergenerational families, support for the elderly? So talking about more so how do we support the elderly aspects of our family, and I think Christian referred early to the widowed, or perhaps maybe those that are ill, that sort of thing, because I heard a lot of talk about the nuclear family and families and their grandchildren, but let's sort of shift the other way a little bit and think about, because society doesn't always like us to think about the older members of our families. So, Dr. McQueen, do you have some thoughts to get started, or should I go along the line? I know Margaret's still thinking.
Okay. Yeah. Right now in society, I think we're really at a crisis point with regard to our aging of our elderly population. And I mean, we've been talking, about the family and the reality of a lot of breakdown in the family, a lot of dysfunction in the family. a lot of people who don't feel they have the support from their family. I've been journeying with one individual who has, 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they don't talk to her at all. So that's a reality for many people. So they don't have that nuclear family, that closeness. And I really think as church, we really need to then extend ourselves and to reach out. There's a lot of people that are living in isolation. There's a lot of people that are lonely. And even though you see people attend Mass, who may be single, a lot of times they almost literally feel like a fly on the wall, that they're there, but nobody really sees them. And I think that's really important that we become very much aware of that, and to be able to reach out. And I think as parishes, I know through Dr. Moira McQueen, her work with Horizons of Hope, I think is just so instrumental in helping that. The Horizons of Hope, we'll let Dr. Moira McQueen speak a little bit more about that, but one of the modules that's presented is really a call to action. And as parishes, being able to come together and to reach out to our fellow parishioners. And one of the things that I've been working on the last couple of years is a program, a parish ministry program, where a group of parishioners are doing that. They're going out and reaching out to those individuals who are isolated, who maybe, oftentimes can't make it to Mass because of some medical conditions, but more so they, are feeling alone, not part of the church community. And it's so important that we're able to go and to reach out to them. So I think that's something that's really important. The other thing that I think that's being faced within the families, of course, is just the economics of the affordability of housing. And so, in terms of having, I know for my children, the thought of them being able to afford a home, and it's kind of like what, when I began working in nursing, and a couple of years after we got married, we were able to put a down payment on a home. Well, my children can't do that. So just taking care of all that in terms of what we're going to be faced with, which is not necessarily a bad thing, that we may have to all live together a little bit longer, but how do you maintain that and do that and have that independence and that growth and all of that combined. And the last thing I'll say is, as people do, the resources out there for the elderly in terms of long care term facilities and people, for example, getting good, authentic palliative care in the homes, the wait lists, the services that are out there are not sufficient, and that's something that we really need to work towards.
Mix it up, or you want me to go?
Christian, do you want to go? Sitting on last?
Okay, so like everybody here, I'm very scandalized by the euthanasia culture that seems to be present in Canada. I was going to go and start saying the culture of death and St. John Paul II, what have you, but I think that we can say that in the period that we've had euthanasia in Canada, we're pretty enthusiastic about it as a whole, surpassing Belgium and Holland relatively quickly, with still questionable data coming out to study. And I mentioned this, I think that the elderly are the most vulnerable when it comes to euthanasia overall. And those living with disabilities, but the elderly in particular. And so if you combine what we you combine what we here are expressing as a tendency towards loneliness, despair, a sense of guilt, a feeling of burden of society, with an option that's becoming, quite frankly, socially acceptable in this country, it makes me extremely worried. I think also we might have to even take a look at ourselves also. The whole concept of the old folks home, I think that's that's the correct term for it, the old folks home. But home for the elderly. What are they? Long-term care home, yeah. So the seniors.
If they don't need care.
So Shady Meadows, the old folks home, they have Shady Farm. This, remember when they all had names like that? Okay, so we. It seems to be a part of Anglo-American culture more than any other. Really, I remember even during COVID when it became an extreme concern, especially early when the effects were devastating on people in those. The United Kingdom and Canada are the top two places in the world for that option for seniors, followed, not surprisingly, by the United States and Australia. So the whole Anglo-American. I'm not saying that, so we have to take a look at maybe other options too, and there are political ramifications as well, right? Home care and, the visit from the personal assistant. I forgot the letters for it, but, thank you. It means different things in different countries and stuff as well, right? The multi-generational household, which we may or may not. There are other concerns too. Maybe even in church, right? I know I've seen people, my relatives in Europe, every Sunday take heroic measures bringing people to church, where you have to start 45 minutes before Mass starts, get the wheelchair out, the car, everything like that. Here says, communion minister. Or, well, she'll be okay, the Lord will understand. And that's true in many ways, but it just goes to show you that maybe we've fallen into sort of practices that we bought into rhetoric, right? We bought into a dialogue that maybe we shouldn't. We see this in other areas as well. You brought up housing, right? I already told my kids, it kind of hurt me as a Canadian. I said, maybe you won't be able to own a house for a long, long time. Maybe you're going to have to rent for 10 years first. Get that in your head. What are the things that are more important, right? And I think, it would be more important maybe to, enter into a family, to get married, to have children, to contribute that way, more important than home ownership or having to move 3.5 hours away. Because that's the only place where they can afford a home. And so we have to do things because we feel that they're the right things to do. And I think we're pretty lucky that they're not only the right things to do as Catholics, but they seem to work for Canada and for society in general. We have to remember that over here. It's not us seeking to be different. It's us reaffirming and doing what we already profess to be the truth.
I have two maybe almost opposite thoughts, if that's okay, in picking up on, I think, these themes. The first, I just want to start with people for whom the word family is a painful reality. And it's so common. Part of maybe a personal thing, I so dislike the expression when we're in church about family and friends. We're all family and friends here. Many people are family to no one and friends to no one, but they're in that church because they belong to that family, which is the body of Christ. And I have a bit of an aversion to blurring those two things, I'm thinking here of when you were talking, actually, Margaret, of someone I knew some years ago who lived in social housing. And she was an elderly woman when I met her. She was always alone. She was like a hoarder, so she always kind of had an air of bed bugs, pardon me, and things like that. And when she fell and broke her hip, and she ended up in the hospital, and she was quickly, of course, even in the Catholic hospital she was in, she was quickly subject to many kinds of pressure and her power of attorney. Anyway, we learned at her funeral that that woman actually had 9 children, 9 grown-up children, all of whom were taken from her by the Children's Aid Society. There was violence in the home. It's not a negative about Children's Aid. But for her, if you talk family, you don't speak to her. Like, that doesn't speak to her heart. And she's vulnerable. And people who were not part of family are very, very, very vulnerable. That was 15 years ago. How much more vulnerable people are now when they do not have someone to be with them. That's my first thought. But my opposite thought, I'm sorry to say this, is I feel like on the intergenerational question, I think we're at risk in Canada of having the generations become used as agents against each other in the thirst for a mate. And if I just may say this the way I think it, if that's okay, because sometimes you see maybe older people, or just what when you see stories of mate, sort of the quintessential, the smiling person who just is in control of their life, they call their family around their bed. And I know people who, they just went to a family gathering and it turned out to be a maid gathering, they didn't even know. And those people are sort of being trained to learn that maid is natural, right? That maid is a natural ending for life. We're being trained to be agents of that. And I wonder, especially for our younger generations, who, they're new in all of this, like this is normal, right? How are they not going to become agents of death towards their grandparents and their parents without really knowing that's what's happening to them, as it becomes a question of how you're taking up a bed and you're using healthcare dollars and your life is finished and don't you want the younger people, all that sort of thing. It sounds so nice. And if I were a young person, I would be susceptible to that kind of language, So that to me is place for the church to really be loud, if I can say it that way.
Yeah, loud. Okay, so everybody has really mentioned euthanasia, made one way or the other. I try not to say made, by the way, I know it's a legal term, but I keep saying this all the time. It's not medical assistance in dying, it's medical assistance to die, and they should correct the terminology. It's not a minor point, because I think it's one of the points that coalesces a little bit, Mary, with what you're saying about younger people being swept into thinking this is normal. That normalization, the more people who have being euthanized, the more we begin to see it is developing in Canada. So I won't launch into it anymore because I know you have, and it's a very serious point. And also, thank you for bringing up Horizons of Hope, because that again is an area where the Canadian Church, the Canadian bishops did want to speak out. And I also wish it could be louder, but they may have to depend on us lay people to be the louder mouths. But that was the response to try and persuade people, educate people into knowing church teaching on euthanasia, church teaching on end-of-life issues in general, because it can be a difficult time. Not so much church teaching on palliative care, because doesn't belong to the Catholic Church. Palliative care is a human need. We define them as rights, but I think it's a human need, that care at the end of life. And so this Horizons of Hope program is really, I'm sorry, it sounds like an advert for, but it's one of the few things I can think about that is actually available for parishes at the minute, where they can have sessions where it's a four sessions, 4 2-hour sessions, where they can talk about these points and discuss them with each other. And it amazed me the first time when we did the pilot studies during COVID, the number of people who thought that MAID was different from euthanasia. And these are in Catholic parishes. And so I realized that there's a very basic level of education needed. And then beyond the education, Margaret, as you said, there is a call to action. Again, it's not just the information, it's what we do with it. And part of the hope of the bishops was that different responses in different parishes would happen. So you would have parish nurses, which is wonderful, or groups who are organised to visit hospices, or groups who go and visit the sick. I mean, many parishes are already doing these things. Again, most of these things are not new. For a long time, many parishes, or people within the parishes, I should say, have been looking towards the care of the elderly. So I'm just encouraging you, if you're from a parish that hasn't had the program, find out about it from the Office of Formation and Discipleship. 2 years ago, after the program was published, Cardinal Leo asked Sister Mary and myself to talk to all the priests of the Archdiocese of Toronto at their one of their annual meetings. We had to do it twice because there are so many priests, which is a good thing in itself. But the priests did the program. They didn't come along to hear about the program. They actually went through the program. So I would say there are very few priests in Toronto Archdiocese who don't at least know about the program. So if people raise the question with them, there may be some success. So anyway, it's one thing that we can do at least to help the elderly in the parish setting, quite apart from our own endeavours.
I want to say thank you to the panel. We have so many time limitations this afternoon. We get into such wonderful topics. Want to hear from everyone. We've already started to hear about some solutions, horizons of hope, and I just sort of want to go down the line and pass the speaker along, the microphone to each of the speakers, and invite you to share any solutions you might have for the family and society, whether it be more talk about the horizons of hope or anything like that, just to close the topic so that we can think about solutions.
I think one word that comes to mind is building community, and that is within your own family, within your church community, within your civil community, your school community, just the importance of community building and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially I would emphasize strong parish life. Like really, the parish is the lifeblood of the church. And like where else? A strong parish life and horizons of hope, education in the parish. I just find people are really hungry to be educated in their faith, and they don't necessarily know how to ask, or they feel shy or whatever, or it's not so easy, to do that when you're also raising a family or whatever it is. But I don't know, to me, we really, really need ways for theological education to meet people in parish life.
Yeah, you just made me think, Mary, that something I often realize is that most Catholics, their real religious education, despite what some may say about the Catholic schools, usually ends once they leave high school and go to university. So it is very much up. I do believe this for the Church to provide adult education, which means, again, lay people who are educated, who are willing to do it. I also think we need longer marriage preparation courses. I don't think that particular form of formation, maybe more than education, is nearly long enough. And just one last thing is that several years ago I was privileged to be the Canadian lay representative at the Synod on Marriage and Family in 2015. Every one of us was given 3 minutes to make a presentation. I think out of 250 people, 50 of whom were lay people, only 2 of the presentations were on the elderly. One was myself, and one just happened to be another Canadian, Bishop Noel Simard from Quebec. And it struck me then that, this is a synod on marriage and the family, but as far as the intergenerational part's concerned, it wasn't there.
So, I think we must have the courage to be witnesses. It's extremely powerful. I agree with Moira, although I think it might even end earlier. One of the reasons why about 10 years ago Cardinal Collins changed from grade 8 to grade 7 confirmation, because there was already a perception that you graduate from elementary school in grade 8, you also graduate from the church at that point as well. At least in grade 7 there'd be one more year of elementary school formation. But I do see tremendous hope. I'm optimistic. I really am, teaching young people and getting to teach them in a Catholic course. And yes, we have ones who have been in formation and have contemplated religious life, and we have others who might confide in me, I'm not really Catholic, I'm baptized, but I'm interested, I like you, Christian, so on. I said, well, no problem. Learn something, right? And so young adults, very fertile ground for evangelization. And of course, always, dear friends, often the most effective and even the quickest means of achieving something is through prayer. So let us be steadfast.
I think we've run short for any questions, unfortunately, but maybe one question?
The license of hope run 4 sessions. Is that with the Office of Formation of Discipleship? So that's who I call. If I want to get a speaker out to the parish.
That was a quick and easy question. Thank you. Okay. So thank you everyone for coming, and for those that are able, please stay on. We're going to continue talking about the family in the context of education. So that will be our next topic momentarily. Thank you.